Welcome back to Business Week here on Rise News. I'm joined now by Steve Osho, who is Managing Director at Commercial Partners Capital, to review some of our top stories. Steve, it's a pleasure to have you on Business Week. Good morning to you.
Morning, Avi.
Very well. Well, let's begin here in Nigeria, where the economy has maintained a positive growth trajectory in Q1 2024. What do we make of this, or what can we attribute this to?
I think it's been a very positive vibes in terms of what was recorded in terms of the GDP growth for the second quarter. And I think if you look at it from, Q1, if you look at it from the number or statistic that was released in Q4, I think the number is quite low, slightly lower than what was recorded in Q4. I think Q4 number was 3.4. But if you compare that number to what was recorded quarter on quarter in 2023 against what was recorded in 2024 Q1, I think the Q1 number was slightly higher than what was reported in 2023. So which shows that we are growing gradually, but not at the pace we want to be compared to the trajectory we actually recorded in 2024 Q4. That said, I think if you look at the statistics and the number, it looks to me that the non-oil sector are being the major contributor to that growth. And it's something we have to look at critically as a nation, which shows that even though we've ramped up in terms of oil production and Q1 from 1.55 in 2023 Q4 to about 1.57 now, million barrels per day. So it means that we have to ramp up in terms of production, but we're not at the benchmark set at the beginning of the year for the budget. We saw about 1.78 million barrels per day. Which shows that there's some level of improvement in terms of all the issues we used to have before in terms of oil theft and all of that. But I think more still needs to be done, considering the fact that oil just contributes barely 7% to the GDP of the country. So we have the non-oil sector that's actually the catalyst for the GDP in that statistics. I think from the numbers we've seen that non-oil sector actually contribute about 93% to that, and mostly driven by the service sector. You know, service sector alone contribute about 55% to the real GDP. And we have the financial insurance, financial institution and insurance. We have the agri sector, which is mostly on crop production. We have the telecoms, and a few other investment areas that actually contributing to that GDP. So for me, those are the areas we need to look at. It's growing at a very slow, growth or slow rate, but I think the trajectory is actually good for the economy.
Right, but a lot more still needs to be done.
Yes,
we can't forget about that. And of course, we're going to discuss this in a lot more detail later in the show. But now, staying in West Africa, let's move over to Ghana, where the central bank has now held rates. What do we make of this?
Well, the Ghana story is not surprising to us because if you look at the assessment of the global and the local macroeconomic activities in that country, which was the basis at which it actually maintained the MPR at 29%, even though their interbank rate is still within the anchor rate that they have. I think the interbank rate in Ghana is around 31 to 32%, which is within the range that they want. But again, it's been obvious from a lot of monetary policies that have been seen across, even in advanced economy and developing economy, that the central bank of this world are trying to monitor slowly and be very patient with the statistics before they actually do anything otherwise. And Ghana has been on the back of a lot of pressure on the cedi, and because of that, it calls for a bit of caution from Bank of Ghana to actually make sure that they retain the NPR at that point. And that's the reason why that reason why they did that. Even though they actually said that the reserve is at a very good point now. I think it's higher than the Q4 numbers in 2023. I think there are around 6.5 billion, which is good enough to finance about 3 months or 4 months import, compared to what they have before, which is barely financing about 2 months import. So good statistic coming from there. And if you know the story around having discussion with the bilateral creditors, France and China has been on the table, which we are thinking or we're hearing that in the next few weeks, we actually might have some, kind of agreement signed, and which will probably create wave for the IMF loan as well. For me, it looks like things are beginning to happen gradually in Ghana. But again, the Bank of Ghana is trying to be very cautious. And I think the fiscal discipline is another thing they have to watch. Because if you look at the expenditures compared to the revenue that they have, is actually very high compared to the revenue that's been brought in for the first quarter. So those are the intricacies with the Ghana story. And I think that's actually warranted them to say, at this point, it would be good for us actually to retain their NPR at this level, so considering all the parameters and statistics we have, yes, and let's watch what will happen going forward.
And a very good point there, because we can't forget that Ghana has been trying to emerge from one of its worst economic crises, and all this restructuring has to happen.
Especially coming from the default that they had in their Ghana bonds and all of
absolutely,
that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, like you said, very necessary move, and let's watch and see how that plays out.
Yeah.
But now let's move on to Kimberly-Clark. For those who don't know, there's the makers of sanitary towels and baby diapers. And what makes this an interesting topic is this is after $100 million investment in this market.
2 years ago.
Yeah, so what can we attribute this to?
Well, from the statement that they released, I think it's looking more like the state of the economy is actually biting hard on the manufacturing company. And that's the reason why some of these things are actually coming out. If you look at the story of P&G, that just left as well. And you look at the statement that have been made by PZ, critically evaluating their operation in Africa, and especially in Nigeria, that they have the biggest operation. So it means that there's something going on that is really impacting the manufacturing sector negatively. And that boils down to a lot of monetary policy, interest rate that is really high, the exchange rate issues and all of that. I think one of those things that they mentioned is actually high cost, of raw material. And scarcity of raw materials. And they say, again, the high cost of energy. So I think that is being major issue that may be affecting them. From what I've heard, they've actually been having a bit of sketchy operation for the past 2 years. In fact, for the past 1 year.
Sketchy meaning?
Yes, sketchy means that they've not actually been operating at the full capacity.
So not on a more skeletal...
Exactly. So more skeletal. I think they'll be doing more of maybe shift for their staff who used to run on 24 hours before on operation. So which means that something is not going right. And I heard about they've been spending about 500 million monthly on cost.
That's exorbitant.
That's a lot. So you have to be able to strip that and say, how much is the company making monthly to be able to cater for this? I think that's the reason. And for me, it is not a good news for Nigeria, because we want all these companies in Nigeria, because they provide jobs opportunity for a lot of Nigerians, and they living at this point in time when we have very precarious situation in terms of our economy is not a good story to actually be at this point.
No, it really isn't.
But the reality is reality, because as a businessman you have to face the reality. What's going on? What's the best option? What can you do? If you look through your change management process and you cannot find any way out, especially for people that actually have their parent body outside the country, some of them will be forced to say, you know what, this is the time for us to take decision to exit.
Certainly, one has to, look at the broader industry challenges, which is what, Kimberly-Clark is doing. And, it's quite noteworthy as well that this isn't the first time Kimberly-Clark is exiting the market, because that happened in 2019. There was a resumption of activities in 2021, and, just barely a couple of years after, here we are.
It just tells you that they actually might reappraise the situation again. But I think for now, what they're looking at is we need to leave at this point. But again, business is a going concern, so they will look at it and say, what have we got wrong? And is there any opportunity in Nigeria? Nigeria represents the largest market in Africa. You understand? So I think it's something that they will need to consider. But right now, on the exigency of what they have to act, and that's what they've done. It's very sad, and it's not good for the economy. So
you think it's likely they would resume operations again in the future?
I think, people will always appraise it. I remember the story of some banks in 2004 during the recapitalizations of the banking sector and during the Soludo regime. And a lot of them actually decided that they were not going to stay in Nigeria because the capitalization was too much for them and all of that. But along the line, some decisions were taken and people reappraised the entire situation and say, oh, I think it's the right time. The same thing with telecoms. We had the likes of, I can't remember their name now, that changed the name to Airtel and all of that, came to Nigeria. They are appraised, I think it's Vodafone or Vodacom, I can't remember exact. And they decided at this point, we don't think we want to stay in Nigeria. And they left. But MTN stayed. And thereafter, they started reappraising the situation again or how to come to Nigeria because they could see there's a lot of opportunity in Nigerian economy. And if you are not actually there, you are missing out. So for me, I don't think it's a close case. But for now, that's what they've said. We don't know too much about the management decision and operation that is going on and the kind of discussion that will be going on behind the scene. But I think in the next few years, we'll see what happens. Yeah,
we'll have to see. And, certainly as with every business, very critical and realistic feasibility studies of each market you operate in is always very key. So let's wait and see.
I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to the U.S. where we have GDP growth being revised. What do we make of this one? Revised lower.
Well, I think the market concessions was looking around 1.5 revision from about 1.6. They revised to 1.3, but it's actually quite obvious that there's been a slowdown in growth, and the lower consumer purchase, and because of that, that actually was revised lower. And considering the fact that I think the last time that we saw a bit of contraction was in the first half of 2022 in the U.S. economy. But lately, you've seen that the inflation has remained a bit sticky and growth has been a bit low. In fact, there has been some concern and discussion around is there a likelihood of the economy actually going back into recession, even though people have been saying that this is quite unrealistic at this point. We don't think that's going to happen. But the slow growth is actually giving the Fed a lot of pressure. And that's the reason why even the odds for the Fed actually cutting rate before September or by September has actually gone up to about 58% from about 48 earlier. I think it's something that the Fed is actually looking critically, and that's a lot of statistics that's going to come here, and even on the number of claim for jobs actually increased again in the last statistic that was released from 216 to 219,000. So those are the kind of things that they are looking at. They are looking at inflation, they are looking at the GDP, and they are looking at a lot of other statistics. And they've said that even BOE and Fed have actually oftentimes said that they are going to rely so much on statistics. And that is what's going to drive whatever decision they're going to make. And because of what happened, that statistics that were released, we saw a bit of increase in yield on average 10-year paper. And that has spooked the market a bit. And that actually was one of the reasons why a lot of investors and actually traders are thinking the cut in interest rate by September might not happen, and actually might stay longer, which we have to wait and see what happens eventually.
So quite a number of varying dynamics playing there. And I wish we had a bit more time. Time is unfortunately against us, but I would have wanted us to touch on the surge on imports as well, and inventories, reduction in inventories, but we'll have to do that another time. Steve, thank you so much for joining us on Business Week today.